In our headlines at this hour, starting on this Monday here in Korea, outdoor mask requirements have been lifted as authorities continue to note a decline in daily tally with slightly over 20,000 infections today. Over in Mariupol, a humanitarian corridor opened this past weekend at the Azovstal steel plant, allowing safe passage to some 100 civilians, including children. On the local front, parliamentary confirmation hearings are underway for nominees of the incoming Yoon administration, including Prime Minister nominee Han Duck-soo. Hope your work week is off to a good start. It's Monday afternoon, May 2nd here in Korea, and you're watching the Daily Report. A total of 20,084 new COVID-19 infections have been reported here on this Monday as the country does away with its outdoor mask requirement. Our Peon-ji starts us off.
Starting Monday, people in South Korea will be able to go outside without wearing a mask. This means people are no longer required to wear masks in most outdoor situations, including on hiking trails, at outdoor weddings, and at above-ground outdoor subway stations. This is the first time in almost a year and a half that the mask mandate has been lifted since October 2020, when the country implemented the measure.
Even after lifting all social distancing rules, the number of COVID-19 patients has been declining for the past 6 weeks. The number of new cases was down by 30% this week compared to the week before.
But there are a few exceptions. People will still need to wear a mask when they attend rallies, concerts, or sports events of 50 or more people. Also, wearing masks is recommended in places where it is difficult to maintain a distance of more than 1 meter from others for more than 15 minutes. So it's recommended that masks still be worn at places like amusement parks or on the beach. Masks are also strongly advised for those who have COVID-19 symptoms or those who are at high risk of infection, such as the elderly or those who have not been vaccinated. Although much of the mask mandate has been lifted, people will still have to wear masks indoors as well as on buses, subways, and taxis. Peon-ji, Arirang News.
And business prospects for the month of May are looking bright among small business owners here in the country amid the recent rollback in restrictions. According to the Small Enterprise and Market Service on this Monday, the business sentiment among small businesses stood at 101 points, up some 10 points compared to the previous month. This figure is also the highest since April 2018. A reading above 100 indicates a greater sense of optimism than pessimism. And the ripple effects of Indonesia's abrupt halt in palm oil exports are already being felt by consumers here. Local pundits believe the financial burden will continue into the latter half of this year. Our Om-jeong explains.
The impact of the war in Ukraine and Indonesia's expanded ban on exports of palm oil means consumers are seeing higher prices not just for the snacks in their shopping carts, but also for cosmetics. Palm oil is vital for most of the world's packaged consumer products, and roughly 70% of all U.S. cosmetics products use some palm oil. Currently, the palm oil price stands at around $1,450 per ton, soaring by more than 40% on year. It's a surge of around 95% compared to the start of the pandemic in March 2020. In South Korea, consumers are seeing prices of more than 80 cosmetic products going up by around 10%. Firms are responding to the situation by using what they have in storage, and they're preparing for further price rises.
We are using palm oil from Malaysia, and there is no problem in terms of supply as of yet, as we are maintaining stable partnerships with our many global contractors. But as further price hikes are expected, we are seeking ways to brace for them.
With the rising prices of goods, a recent study says South Korea's economy in the second half of the year is likely to experience high inflation, high interest rates, and a weaker Korean won against the dollar. A report by local think tank Hyundai Research Institute says the economic uncertainty is forecast to grow in the second half of the year. It says inflationary pressure has been going up further due to the surge in oil and raw material prices amid the war in Ukraine and the ongoing global supply chain disruption. With this, the Bank of Korea's new governor, Lee Chang-yong, expects the current high inflation to last for the next year or two and said that the central bank will continue to raise interest rates to tame high inflation. Also, with the U.S. central bank expected to move swiftly to rein in inflation with a possible half-point rate rise at its next policy meeting in May, the Korean won hit a two-year low against the U.S. dollar last week. The institute added that soaring inflation and the hike in key interest rates will cause consumer spending to shrink and will put more interest payment burdens on firms and households. 엄지영, Arirang News.
Beijing Special Representative on Korean Peninsula Affairs Liu Xiaoming is here in Seoul to discuss Pyongyang's nuclear intentions. Addressing journalists at Incheon International Airport upon arrival on Sunday, Liu spoke of hopes for collaboration between Seoul and Beijing aimed at easing tensions on the peninsula. He also added the key to North Korea's nuclear ambitions lies in the hands of Pyongyang and Washington. Liu will meet with his South Korean counterpart Gyeonggi-do on Tuesday. There has been a partial evacuation of civilians from the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol. The humanitarian corridor was opened amid an unexpected visit to Kyiv by U.S. House Speaker, that is, Nancy Pelosi. Our Kim Yo-sun has the latest.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said some 100 civilians have been evacuated from the Azovstal steel plant in the city of Mariupol. The UN later confirmed that an operation to evacuate Ukrainians had been underway since Friday. The organization's spokesperson explained that a safe passage operation is ongoing in coordination with the International Committee of the Red Cross. Women and young children were among those who have been evacuated from the plant, where they were trapped underground without water, sanitation, or food. The development comes as U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi made a surprise visit to the Ukrainian capital city, becoming the most senior American official to meet Zelensky.
We believe that we are visiting you to say thank you for your fight for freedom, that we are on a frontier of freedom, and that your fight is a fight for everyone. And so our commitment is to be there for you until the fight is done.
Pelosi said earlier that she hoped a $33 billion aid package for Ukraine, requested by President Joe Biden, will be passed in Congress as soon as possible. In a push to increase sanctions against Russian oligarchs, U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has laid out plans to liquidate billions in frozen assets and donate the proceeds to Ukraine. Over $30 billion of Russian assets have been frozen. But under U.S. law, frozen assets are still owned by the person being sanctioned and cannot be transferred or sold. In related news, Moscow's defense ministry says it had targeted weapons supplied to Ukraine by Western countries and destroyed a runway at a military airfield in Odessa. Meanwhile, a former NATO Supreme Allied Commander for Europe said Sunday that the, quote, amazing incompetence of the Russian military in invading Ukraine has led to an unprecedented number of deaths among generals and other high-ranking officers. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol is in Gyeonggi-do Province as part of his ongoing nationwide tour. He's visiting a construction site in Ilsan where a Metropolitan Express line is being extended. Also on his list of venues are cities including Anyang, Suwon and Yongin. According to his spokesperson, Yoon will check on transportation and housing construction sites and hear from residents on their needs under the new administration. Yoon has so far traveled around the south and central parts of the country. The confirmation hearing for Prime Minister nominee Han Duck-soo has resumed on this Monday and will last until tomorrow, that is Tuesday. The hearing initially kicked off last week but failed to proceed after the Democratic Party and the minor Progressive Justice Party staged a boycott, citing Han's failure to submit essential information. Also, on this Monday, 5 other hearings will take place, including for Yoon's Deputy Prime Minister pick, a role that doubles as Finance Minister, as well as for the Foreign Minister, Land Minister, Culture Minister and Environment Minister positions. The next 2 weeks will see a series of hearings for other positions in Yoon's first cabinet, during which heated debate is expected between his People Power Party and the soon-to-be main opposition Democratic Party. Here in South Korea, the post of Prime Minister is the only cabinet position that requires parliamentary approval. Also in related news, former Vice Foreign Minister Kim Sung-han has been tapped to head the National Security Office under the incoming administration. Our Yoon Jung-min has more on the lineup of senior secretaries.
The names of the senior secretaries who will serve under President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol were revealed on Sunday by Yoon's pick for Presidential Chief of Staff Kim Dae-gi and his current Chief of Staff Chang Jae-won. To head the National Security Office, they named former Vice Foreign Minister Kim Sung-han. Kim currently leads the Foreign Affairs and Security branch of the Presidential Transition Committee and has reportedly played a leading role in designing Yoon's foreign and security policy, seeking to bolster the South Korea-U.S. Comprehensive Strategic Alliance.
We believe he is the right person to serve as a control tower for protecting the security of the nation and the people by actively responding to security environments at home and abroad.
Former Presidential Secretary on Security Strategy Kim Tae-hyo was named as the first Deputy Director of the National Security Office, while former Presidential Officer for Risk Management Shin In-ho was picked as the second Deputy Director. And former Operations Director at the Joint Chief of Staff Kim Yong-hyun is to serve as Chief of the Presidential Security Service. Yoon's senior political secretary will be former lawmaker Lee Jin-bok. His senior economic secretary, former Vice Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok, and his senior social secretary, Professor An Sang-hun of Seoul National University. As for Yoon's senior secretary for civil society, they named former lawmaker Kang Seung-gyu. In charge of communications will be former journalist and current vice president at Hyoseong Group Choi Young-bum. And former journalist Kang In-sun has been named spokesperson. The incoming Yoon administration is doing away with the separate office for policy, so there will be just 2 offices, one for national security and the other for the presidential secretaries. It's also getting rid of the senior secretary posts for civil affairs, employment and personnel affairs, thereby cutting the number of secretaries from the current 8 to 5. This follows President-elect Yoon's pledge to downsize and streamline the presidential office. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
On Viewpoint this Monday afternoon, we delve into the incoming administration's planned COVID-19 response framework, as well as the Biden administration's ongoing efforts against the pandemic. For that purpose, I have Professor Chung Gi-seok from Hallym University. He's also on the Presidential Transition Team's COVID-19 Response Committee. Professor Chung, it's been a while and it's a pleasure to have you back.
My pleasure to be here again.
I also have Professor Peter Chin-hong at the University of California, San Francisco, live on the line. Professor Chin-hong, again, it's a pleasure to have you too.
Thanks for having me back on, Sunny.
Right, Professor Chung, we'll start here then. The Presidential Transition Team has unveiled a 100-day roadmap to respond to COVID-19 upon the launch of the new administration on May 10th. Could you tell us a bit more about the gist of this roadmap?
Well, it has 4 major pillars and 34 specific targets. The first one is the science-based quarantine policy. It's like evidence-based medicine. So we need data, big data, and antibody level. As you know, already know, we are going to check antibody level in about 10,000 population. And the integration of all information system is needed because we don't know, we know that who are vaccinated, we know that who are admitted, but there is no integration between the system. So we are going to make that kind of system. And the second one is a sustainable infectious disease response system. So far, the healthcare center belonging to a local government has been managing all the patients. It's not sustainable because we have far more clinics and hospitals in the neighborhood. So we are going to make all those clinics participating in this coming pandemic. And also the emergency room system and ICU system will be more organized, and nobody can be in the waiting list for admitting to ICUs. And the third one is intensive protection of high-risk population facilities. As you know, the high-risk population, immune-compromised, elderly people, those people has been dying due to COVID-19 because of a bit late treatment, late diagnosis. So we are going to make a fast track for them. So early diagnosis, early administration of antiviral pills will make them the fatality very low. So that's the third one. The final one is in the vaccines, antiviral agent. So we are going to secure more secure supply of vaccines, antiviral agent, and also there are some people who have been hurted by vaccination, adverse event. There will be a sufficient compensation for them.
Right, I see. Professor Chin Hong, in early March, the Biden administration shared its own new strategy against the pandemic, the National COVID-19 Preparedness Plan, I believe. Now, I understand this strategy has 4 objectives. Could you briefly share them with us?
Yes, Sunny. So the overall strategy is really one of prevention, and not only domestically, but also with an eye towards the world as well. And these 4 objectives, I think of them as the 4 Ps, are prevention and treatment in general. And that includes also a test and treat strategy around Paxlovid, the oral medication for COVID, or early COVID. As well, there is also, some thinking around research into long COVID. The second P, of course, is preparing for new variants. And that includes looking at wastewater, also some thinking around new vaccines and combining different variants for the next generation of vaccines. The third is preventing economic and shutdowns in schools. And what that includes also is, interestingly, ventilation in schools that's going to be upgraded, as well as strategies like giving money to workers who get taken out of the workforce because they are infected. And finally, the 4th strategy, the 4th P, has an eye towards the world, and that is continuing to think about providing actual vaccines as well as funding to produce vaccines into the arms, to make sure they get into the arms of people, not just in the US, but around the world. So more than 1 billion vaccines have been promised. But of course, all of this takes money. And right now, that discussion is in the Congress. It will take at least $10 billion to effect all of these 4 Ps.
Right. Professor Chin Hong, top U.S. infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci says the U.S. has transitioned into a controlled phase of the pandemic. What do you suppose he means? I mean, does this mean that the U.S. is a step closer, perhaps, to declaring an endemic phase of this disease? And speaking of that, what prerequisites, Professor Chin Hong, would be necessary to make such a declaration, do you think?
Well, Sunny, Dr. Fauci initially got some heat because of the verb he used. He said transitioned into more of a controlled phase, and I think many people were thinking it should have been a gerund, which is transitioning. So I think what he was talking about was the fact that we went from 3,000 deaths a day to about 300 now. There are new agents like Paxlovid, there are new tools in the toolkit. But I think that the difference is, and the reason why we're not necessarily in an endemic phase, is that endemicity requires predictability. And the only thing predictable about COVID is that it's unpredictable. So even though these flavors of Omicron, BA1, BA2, BA4 and 5 now from South Africa, are very, very similar, and we have a large amount of immunity, a big immunity force field in the country right now. Take the fall or the winter in the United States, there may be a new variant, and it may not be the same.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, back here in the country, Professor Chung, authorities have lifted the outdoor face mask requirement as of this Monday, but the Presidential Transition Committee had spoken about making a decision on the fate of outdoor face masks in late May. How does this latest decision by the current administration look to affect plans by the new administration?
Well, it's a kind of a small conflict between two bodies. I think it's about time to take off masks outdoor. Right? But if you look at the daily tallies and current situation in Korea, it's not stable. So the daily tally is still tens of thousands patients, and there are quite many ICU patients still remaining and still occurring every day. And even though the government is banning gathering of 50 or more people without taking masks, but there are some concerns about high-risk people, and also some concerns of very close get-together within 2 meters and eating and chatting for quite a long time, then you can easily transmit. If you have anyone has a virus in their mouth, then you can easily be transmitted. So I suggest, as a member of a committee, made a target to the current government and say, let's say, in order to do that, you must halve the mortality. Current case fatality is about 0.1%. If you can halve the case fatality, like 0.05%, that's good. And if you keep daily tally below 50,000 every day, it's almost 50,000 weekly average, but then we'll be more secure to take off all the masks in our outdoors. Because the early lifting may delay the decreasing tendency of current circulating virus, and the accumulation of those viruses in our society then make a fuel to a winter resurgence. So I don't like to see many viruses circulating in our society until the entrance of autumn. That's not a good sign.
Right, it isn't.
Yeah.
And staying with masks, in the US, Professor Chen Hong, face masks continue to fuel much dispute. I mean, some pundits there have said the removal of federal and public transportation masking reflects the rising reliance on informed decisions by members of the public with regard to COVID-19 prevention. What are your thoughts on this trend?
Well, I think a lot of us were astonished when this was overturned by a federal judge from Florida. And the reason why I think we were a little bit nervous is because there are 4 groups still at risk for getting seriously ill. Of course, many people already have immunity. The CDC estimated that more than 60% of Americans have seen COVID already. But nevertheless, not everybody has. And our infections are still rising by about 50% compared to the last 2 weeks. Although deaths are still going down, hospitalizations are still going down. And of course, the 4 groups are those who are over 65 and unboosted, those who are immune compromised, those who are unvaccinated and never exposed, and those who live with any of these groups. So I think it just involves people wearing better masks. So I think on the plane with good ventilation, it's okay. But in public transit, like buses and trains, you have people from all different walks of life. They may not be able to have the best quality masks. So I think in some cities like San Francisco, that has been overturned again. And now masks have been reinstated on public transit, also in Los Angeles.
Right, I see. Good to know. Professor Chung, as you mentioned earlier, the new incoming administration will launch a nationwide antibody testing. Could you tell us about the purpose of testing on the prevalence of COVID-19?
Well, before I say that, the antibody is not the same one. Some antibody can detect both infected and vaccinated, and some antibody can only detect the infected one. So we knew both sides, the level of antibody. And the reason why we are going to know the proportion of infected population, just like Professor Jin Hong said, US said that 60% or more has been infected. So we do not know how much percent of our population has got already infected, even though we have about 15 million people over is infected. But I guess maybe half of our population has been already infected. So that's very important because Because the U.S. said that they have 60% and over of infected, and they are going to go to endemic. If you have, say, 80% of infected person, then we do not need to keep social distancing. We do not need to much focus on the vaccinating fourth shot, fifth shot, and etc. So that's why we are going to check antibody level. And on top of that, the concentration antibody in each individual and the durability of antibody in each individual is very important. That is the main factor to determine whether to put the second or third shot in specific person. That we know that it lasts only 2 months, and in some persons it lasts 6 months, and so on. Infected person, the antibody lasts 8 months, and so on. So we need to know the scientific basis to make a more accurate policy on the vaccination schedule.
Right. And staying with the booster information that Professor Chung has just mentioned, Professor Chin, I hear that the question of how many booster shots are needed remains a very much open question, especially in light of data from Israel that found the second booster's effectiveness fell just a month after vaccination. Where do you stand on the debate over second booster doses?
Well, Sunny, it depends on what your goalpost is. If your goalpost is prevention of infection only, of course, no matter how many boosters you get, if the variant or subvariant looks very different, it may not prevent infection. However, our T cells and B cells that have memory are adaptive. They change with the enemy. And that comes back to that second goal, which is prevention of serious disease, hospitalization, and death. Now, the second booster isn't generally as beneficial in everyone. So the older you are, the better it is. If you look at the European Union, they are saying that we'll give it to folks over the age of 80. In the US, it's approved for those over 50, but the older you are, the better it is. So how do I think about it? I certainly don't think you have to run out to get the second booster. Maybe you can walk out to get it if you're eligible, and you walk a little bit faster the older you are. I think that it's very difficult otherwise, and if we protect our most vulnerable population with the second booster, that's important. And the last point is there's still tens of millions of Americans who haven't got the first booster, and the first booster is unquestionably really, really crucial to prevention long-term of serious disease, hospitalization, and death.
Right, of course. And finally, one final question to Professor Chung before we end. I think we have about a minute. On the treatment front, Professor Chung, within 50 days of its launch, the new administration has spoken of boosting the role of local clinics, as you mentioned earlier. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Well, it has been administered by a Korean government with the healthcare center so far. But as I said before, we have many doctors who have quite many experiences, and nurses all together ready for patients. So patients are very convenient when they can visit neighboring hospitals and clinics, and doctors are ready to diagnose and treat COVID-19. So next surge, as many doctors as possible, maybe more than 30,000 clinics up and down the country can participate in the diagnosis and treatment. Then we can treat COVID-19 as an endemic disease, such as we are treating influenza exactly in Korea, taking care of influenza by GPs and some specialists and neighboring hospital. And the primary, secondary, tertiary hospital transport system will be more organized, and we'll have a more sophisticated emergency room care and ICU care. Then will be quite safe in coming next COVID-19 research.
Right, hopefully. Professor Chung, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today. And Professor Chin Hong over in the US, thank you very much for being live with us at this hour with your insights.
Thanks so much, Sunny.
Right. Now, Korea's exit strategy, that is, from the pandemic, is being largely welcomed by members of the public. Our Choi Min-jung was out on the streets of Seoul to gauge that particular sentiment.
In a public message on Saturday, Prime Minister Yoon Suk-yeol called for suspending operations of religious, indoor sports, and entertainment facilities for 15 days.
Now, South Korea's social distancing measures have banned gatherings of more than 2 people after 6 p.m. A prevention measure this strict is quite unheard of so far.
From today, South Korea is starting its gradual transition back to normal life, a plan called Living with COVID-19, and that means the easing of social distancing rules.
Authorities say there's a chance of cases spiking if restrictions are all eased at once, but they have been gradually easing restrictions.
Well, now it's currently past midnight, and as you can see behind me, the streets of Hongdae are fully packed with people. After more than 2 years of trying to stem the spread of COVID-19, South Korea has made a bold move of removing its social distancing measures. From April 18th, limits on social gathering sizes were lifted, and businesses could operate for 24 hours a day.
I'm loving it. I didn't get a chance to hang out with my friends from university, so it feels great to be able to start doing that now.
I felt like I wasn't given enough time to spend with my friends, but thanks to the easing of restrictions, I can still hang out until this time, so it's great.
I'm not a fan of spending the evening with people from my workplace after work, but I was out with them until late, even yesterday. I think this is one of the downsides of easing restrictions.
Most business owners also welcome the news.
There are more company get-togethers. We've been getting more reservations for groups of 10 to 20 people.
Our sales have definitely increased. Previously, we only earned $230 to $400 a day, but now it's gone up to $1,100.
Large events, including rallies, are no longer limited to under 300 people, and religious services can be held at full capacity as well.
Even more restrictions have gone starting this week. I'm currently at a movie theater that's filled with the smell of popcorn. Previously, snacks were only allowed outside the theaters, but now people can enjoy them while watching movies.
I actually came here because I can now have popcorn while watching a movie. I think I'll enjoy the movie more now.
South Korea's largest cinema chain, CGV, said that on Monday, which was when eating was once again allowed, its ticket sales increased by 86% compared to the same day the previous week.
If you take a look at a slot for past 2 a.m. next week, seats are already almost fully booked, despite it being very late at night. Eating is also allowed at other indoor venues as well, like indoor sports stadiums. More than 3,000 people are here to enjoy the Korean Basketball League, and many of them are eating hamburgers and hot dogs.
I had some chicken and beer with my friends while watching the game. It feels great to be able to watch and enjoy the games with some food, just like we could 2 or 3 years ago.
Last year, it didn't feel like the playoffs were finals due to the antivirus measures, but now we can see fans cheering for the semifinals as if they were the finals. We will try hard to get good results in the finals and hope more fans come and cheer for us.
One of the perks of grocery shopping has returned as well, trying out food samplers. Shoppers couldn't do this for more than a year due to the pandemic. But now, they can feel free to try samples as long as they remember to put their masks back on afterward and keep a 1-meter distance from others. Not only that, people can also test makeup products before deciding to buy them. In line with the falling virus cases, COVID-19 has been downgraded to a lower classification. Since January 2020, it was categorized as a level 1 infectious disease, the most dangerous and highest on the government's 4-tier scale. Now it's been reclassified as a level 2 infectious disease, alongside other well-known diseases such as measles. The downgrade to level 2 means people no longer have to report a COVID-19 infection immediately as long as they report it within 24 hours. A level 2 disease also means self-isolation is no longer mandatory, but this requirement will still be in effect for at least another 3 weeks as the government is implementing a grace period. Once this ends, people with COVID-19 will be able to visit local clinics and hospitals to get treated, just like they would when they catch a cold or the flu.
When people get the flu, they can visit the hospital and get treated immediately. However, in-person treatment for COVID-19 patients is not as established yet, which in many cases delays the process of treating patients. The sooner the patients can get treatment all at one place, the better.
The country seems well on its way to getting life back to normal. But all eyes are now on South Korea's decision regarding the outdoor mask mandate. Health authorities on Friday announced that the mask requirement for outdoors will be partially lifted from May 2nd. The announcement comes in contrast to the Presidential Transition Committee's earlier comments that said the new administration would decide on the fate of outdoor mask requirements in late May. The public seems to have mixed reactions.
They say the situation is less serious now, so I feel happy to be able to take my mask off.
It's getting hot. Summer is coming, so I want to go out without a mask on.
Even with the virus situation improving, I think it's important that people with health issues still wear masks to protect themselves.
There are still a lot of people infected, so I think it's better to keep masks on just to be safe.
Professor Chan says that the lifting of the outdoor mask mandate comes following the falling number of infections, but still stressed that it is important to remain vigilant.
More than half the country's population have not been infected. Considering that, we must maintain mask mandates for indoor venues to protect seniors who are at high risk.
COVID-19 has changed many aspects of our day-to-day lives. While some people support South Korea's return to normal life, many others believe our lives won't be the same even with the lifting of restrictions. Among the changes is the way people work.
To be honest, I prefer working from home. It took me a long time to get to work, but when I'm working from home, I can spend more time doing what I like after work.
We have indefinitely implemented a remote working system since June last year. We are allowing employees to work at their preferred location regardless of whether COVID-19 becomes endemic.
Likewise, many would say that it's crucial to find the best way to coexist with the virus, whether that includes the lifting of social distancing rules or readjusting to new post-pandemic lifestyles. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Over in the English Premier League, Tottenham Hotspur defeated Leicester City 3-1 on Sunday thanks to Son Heung-min's 18th and 19th league goals of the season. Playing at home at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, Harry Kane's 22nd minute from Son's assist gave Spurs a 1-0 first lead half before the South Korean scored in the 60th and 79th minute to claim victory. The two goals from Son also shattered the record for the number of goals scored by South Korean in a European league in a single season, surpassing Cha Bum-geun's record 17 goals in Germany's Bundesliga from 1985 to 1986. And Apple TV Plus has confirmed that the Korean original series Pachinko will return for a second season. The company made the announcement just ahead of the show's season 1 finale on Friday. Based on a novel of the same name written by Korean-American author Lee Min-jin, the setting for the 8-part series begins in the early 1900s and follows 4 generations of a Korean immigrant family in Japan. The tale is told from the perspective of Sunja, the family's matriarch, played by Oscar-winning actress Yoon Suk-yeol. Lee Min-ho, Jin-ha and Kim Min-ha also star in the series. Over in the city of Cheonju, the International Film Fiesta is in full swing there. And our Kim Bo-kyung tells us what some of the highlights that is.
Putting the spotlight on experimental, up-and-coming and passionate young talent. The annual film festival at Cheonju has returned, inviting movie lovers until May 7th. During its 10-day run, the 23rd edition of the Jeonju International Film Festival will feature more than 200 films from over 50 countries. Returning to its regular scale, this year's festival was able to invite foreign directors and actors and present a more diverse range of films. A fully packed Jeonju Dome for the opening ceremony showed just how excited everybody was, including guests from overseas.
I'm super excited and so emotional, especially for being here in Korea. It was a dream for me, so it's really special to be here with a movie after all these years, 3 years in pandemic time. And I'm really glad. Thank you so much for the festival for inviting me.
Judges for the competition section say they hope to see theaters at the festival full so that audiences can enjoy the films as the directors intended.
There's a technical aspect to the experience that theaters give, which directors intend to provide with the way things are shot and the sound is recorded. Directors can also communicate with the audience, letting them know how they felt and thought about the film.
I always find very interesting the Korean competition here because you can find here more this kind of more maybe independent films by new filmmakers, not the big blockbusters of this more audience-oriented film. For me, they are always quite interesting because I think there are a new look on Korean reality, on the problems of younger people, these kind of things.
There are also lots of other attractions at this year's festival. One of them is retrospective showcase of director Lee Chang-dong's films, including Peppermint Candy and Burning, which have been digitally remastered and screened in 4K for the first time. Other events include 5 films selected by Yoon Sang-ho, the director of Train to Busan, who is acting as a special programmer at this year's festival. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News, Jeonju.
In Colombia, a wide array of Korean cultural activities are garnering attention at the 2022 Bogota International Book Fair, where South Korea is participating as a guest of honor. According to the Korean Cultural Center's regional office in Mexico, there were long lines for activities such as dressing up in Korea's traditional attire, the hanbok, learning Korean paper art, and writing names in Korean. The center claims the popularity of Korean culture was evident at the event. The Bogota Book Fair is the second largest book fair in South America, and to celebrate the 60th anniversary of diplomatic ties with Colombia, South Korea was designated as the honorary guest of the event. COVID-19 appears to have accelerated the broader adoption of mRNA technology in vaccine development. Our Cho Heung-min has more on the profound implications of this reality.
While the emergence of COVID-19 has brought significant drawbacks and changes to daily life, it has allowed science to make drastic leaps forward in mRNA vaccine development. Using molecules called messenger RNA instead of the actual virus or bacteria to induce an immune response has been a work in progress since the 1990s. And mRNA vaccines weren't considered to be a reliable option until Pfizer and Moderna commercialized their own for the first time in 2020. Since then, remarkable progress has been made, opening the door for breakthroughs in treatments for incurable illnesses and conditions like cancer and AIDS. A research team at Duke University in the United States is seeing encouraging results from its new mRNA vaccine in treating breast cancer. Last year, other mRNA research in the U.S. showed an 80% efficacy rate against AIDS. In the case of the developments in South Korea, drug makers like ST Pharm and IGen are looking for breakthroughs of their own based on their know-how and experience with mRNA vaccines over the last couple of years. ST Pharm plans to conduct a non-clinical trial on their mRNA cancer vaccines, while IGen has unveiled a roadmap to develop an mRNA vaccine to cure pancreatic cancer.
With the mRNA platform, you only need to replace the nucleus sequence in the middle, according to whatever new viruses emerge like Zika, AIDS, or a new pandemic.
While experts are concerned that mRNA vaccines show a higher rate of side effects than the more conventional vaccination methods, they all agree that South Korea should invest in them heavily, as it could be a game changer in being able to treat various incurable diseases in the future. Cho Heung-min, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, a local research team has devised a 5-minute test to diagnose brain diseases, including dementia. Current tests last 1 hour. Yoon reports.
When a patient experiences memory loss, they visit a neurologist where they are given a neuropsychological test that evaluates the patient's overall cognitive function. This test has become a crucial step for neurologists to diagnose any brain diseases or to assess the progress of rehabilitation. But the existing test not only takes a long time, but there's also a shortage of people to oversee testing. As a result, 90% of the 4 million people in South Korea that need a neuropsychological test don't get tested on time.
Demand for the test is increasing, but there aren't enough clinical psychologists to conduct the test. In the end, it's a problem of supply and demand.
If patients don't get to take the test in time, it becomes more difficult to provide an early diagnosis of brain diseases, which consequently delays treatment and timely rehabilitation. But now, a local research team has developed a new cognitive neuropsychological test that solves both problems. It yields results in just 5 minutes, a significant reduction from the current 60 minutes, and it's also automated. Patients take the test online, from which preliminary results are automatically generated. Those evaluating the test result then make any necessary changes for the final report. The reduction in testing time brought by this latest development in testing software will allow medical staff to tend to more patients. The automated neuropsychological exam reading service is expected to be commercialized in the next 2 years after completing clinical trials. 이은진, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Widespread demonstrations were seen around the globe this weekend as protesters gathered for May Day to honor workers and shame governments into doing more for their citizens. This year, rallies in France opposed Emmanuel Macron's proposal to raise the retirement age from 62 to 65. Taking place a week after Macron's successful re-election, around 250 protests took place across the country with the backing of labor unions. Meanwhile, in Cuba, hundreds of thousands of people gathered on the streets of the capital, Havana, waving banners and pictures of Cuban revolutionary leaders. May Day marches in the country are a celebration of the 63-year-old revolution and a government-led rejection of Cold War-era embargoes imposed by the US. Greece saw 10,000 people march outside the parliament in the capital of Athens, protesting rising living costs they say are unaffordable. This comes as gas and power bills have skyrocketed, following sanctions against Russia following its invasion of Ukraine. In Guinea, the military junta has said the country's return to civilian rule may take over 3 years. This according to Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, head of the junta that took power in September last year. The 39-month proposal comes after other West African nations had called on the military to set a timeline for a democratic transition or face sanctions. Guinea's military overthrew former President Alpha Condé in September 2021, accusing him of widespread state corruption. Military leaders have also taken power in nearby Mali and Burkina Faso over the last 2 years. On Sunday, India saw some respite from soaring temperatures, with some areas 5 to 6 degrees Celsius below recent record-breaking highs. This follows parts of the country recording their highest ever average temperatures for April. Tourists have been using umbrellas as parasols, while many residents have been taking to rivers to cool down as the country grapples with power cuts. Extreme heat waves in India and Pakistan this year have seen melting roads and forced school closures. The heat wave is also thought to be behind a landfall blaze in New Delhi that started on April 26th. Scientists warn that more than 1 billion people are at risk of heat-related issues in the region. Celebrations in Spain's Ibiza and Seville have made a return for the first time in 2 years. The weekend saw partygoers from around the world jet off to Ibiza as clubs opened their doors again. Market data shows that the island is one of Spain's fastest recovering destinations, registering even more bookings for this time of year than before the pandemic. Sevilla, meanwhile, saw thousands celebrate its annual April Fair on Saturday. Festivities included locals dancing Sevillanas, a traditional dance for the region. The week-long fair is expected to draw visitors from all over the world, with a fireworks display by the Guadalquivir River set for its final day. This year, Spain expects international tourist arrivals to reach 80% of pre-pandemic volumes in the second quarter. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Monday afternoon. It's the first week of May and we're starting our work week with clear skies. But eastern regions have some clouds overhead and some scattered showers are in the forecast in the afternoon due to unsettled air. There won't be much with around 5 millimeters, but that could be followed by gusts of wind, lightning, or hail. So stay safe if you live in those areas. And overall, I think today is a gift. Breezy, sunny, and clear. But watch out for the UV index. It's very high in most regions. So please put on your sunscreen if you're going for a walk, run, picnic, or doing something outside for an extended period. It was a bit chilly in the morning, but highs are reaching nearly 20 degrees, just like yesterday. And that is 3 degrees lower than normal in Seoul. It's going to rapidly cool down, so bundle up on your evening commute. While sunny spells should continue until midweek and later in the week, highs will top off at 25-26 degrees. Now let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
That brings us to the end of this edition. We'll be back same time tomorrow with more coverage. Join us then. Thank you for now.